Hi, I'm Steve Carlson, Independence Party candidate for the U.S. Senate, seeking to face Al Franken in the general election. The election is just days away now, on August 12th, and I hope you'll turn out to make it Independence Day in Minnesota. HuffPost says I'm already polling at 13% against Al Franken in a three-way race. And that's good news because it shows our party would stay on the ballot in 2016 based on that statewide Senate race. Well, I want to talk to you about our elections and whether they are clean, pure, free, and fair. Dumb question, right? They're not, I know. But if we break down the DFL quota system so those who believe in democracy can attend and vote in their own precinct caucuses, we'll make a great stride toward taking back our country. Obama and the DFL have robbed us of our democratic rights secured right in our own Minnesota Constitution. You have to watch these people. It's so bad that I came across this 2009 book right here. It's called Crisis of Character, Building Corporate Reputation in the Age of Skepticism. It's so good that I'm going to give a copy to Al Franken himself, if I can find another copy at the dollar store. Yes, it's those of us who shop at the dollar store who need to hear this. And if I win the primary Tuesday, August 2nd, I'll give another copy to Mike McFadden if he's the winner. And if I win the general election, I'll give one to all the members of the U.S. Senate. Again, if I find enough copies at the dollar store, which I probably will be able to. Well, you can't judge a book by its cover. So let's look inside. And right away, you can see that Peter Fierstein, the author, knows his stuff, and it's an important book. I like this. The opportunity to create healed many of the wounds of the generation that had endured the Depression of the 1930s and the war. Isn't that beautiful? You know, that is an economic strategy right there. Yes, we want jobs, but what we really want, what that means, is we want the opportunity to create and to heal. Now, I just yesterday asked the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals in St. Louis to intervene and to cause our state to heal by getting rid of these quotas the DFL has for endorsing candidates. They reduced the white male vote, old guys like me, don't you know, to 35 to 40%. It obviously violates the U.S. Constitution, but the courts are happy with it so far. My other issue is that candidates should have access to the email addresses you provide when you register to vote, so we can send you direct communications in your email. You can read them if you wish and delete them if you wish. They won't jump out and blare at you on your television set. But don't get rid of us old white guys just yet, all right? Not only is it un-American, but we've been part of the solution that helped America create and heal. To use a football analogy, I want to move this offense, and that's why I want to be at the helm in the U.S. Senate. I'm not here to just entertain or to rail at other rich people. Al's rich, Mike's rich, but I'm not rich, just to be clear, just rich in spirit. So to go back to Fierstein, quote, the conduct of corporate life provides one of the defining characteristics for any age. In post-World War II America, business virtually carried the country on its back as corporations translated the organizing principles they had developed in the war effort to create one of the greatest bursts of growth and productivity ever, unquote. And of course we have the baby boom as well, and we hear lots of complaints about that, don't we? As shareholders became well-to-do, unions also flourished. That was then, he says. Writing in 2009, he said his book comes amid one of the greatest financial and therefore human crises in the history of the modern world. That's what we're living through right now. What began as a normalization of inflated home prices in the U.S. exposed unimaginable abuse of the financial system by some of its managers. The creation of mortgage-based derivative securities, most with no underlying collateral except their reference to each other, had reached staggering proportions. While no one knew the exact figure, the total face value of these and other derivative products far exceeded the world's annual economic output, perhaps by a factor of 10. Remarkably few saw the disaster coming, he writes, but those who did often kept quiet and tried to benefit from it. And that's the parallel I'm trying to draw with our political behavior today as well. Fierstein discusses Bernie Madoff. Quote, many people were making a great deal of money, and examining the source of these riches was not only inconvenient, but seen as a waste of time. Some of the Madoff investors had long thought Madoff was engaged in illegal activities. They believed he was abusing his role as a broker-dealer, misappropriating privileged information to trade ahead of his customers in that business. They saw themselves as the beneficiaries of such misdeeds. None considered that they might be victims of a Ponzi scheme. Madoff's investors who suspected him but remain invested offer insight into the psychology of the age. Now, to the Democrats and independents, let me read to you how our democracy is supposed to work. This comes from the U.S. Supreme Court. It's long forgotten in today's political rat race. But in 1884, as the Civil War ended and blacks were allowed to vote, some of the states didn't want that, and they would assault blacks trying to vote for Congress. And so Yarborough was one of the people who attacked a black voter known only as AB. And the Supreme Court went back to a man named James Kent. Now, Kent was not a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, but he rose to be Chief Justice of the New York Supreme Court and also Chancellor, the Chief of the Court of Chancery, which is a court of equity. But it was his commentaries that were used by the Yarborough Court to decide whether Congress could create such a law that would imprison Yarborough and his companions for assaulting AB and other blacks trying to cast their vote in federal elections. And they say, quote, "Of the power to pass these laws, Chancellor Kent, in the opening words of that part of his commentaries, which treats of the government and constitutional jurisprudence of the United States, says, quote, the government of the United States was created by the free voice and joint will of the people of America for their common defense and general welfare. Its powers apply to those great interests which relate to this country in its national capacity and which depend for their protection on the consolidation of the Union. It is clothed with the principal attributes of political sovereignty, and it is justly deemed the guardian of our best rights, the source of our highest civil and political duties, and the sure means of greatness as a national greatness." That's from 1 Kent's Commentaries, 201. It is as essential to the successful working of this government that the great organisms of its executive and legislative branch should be of the free choice of the people, as that is the original form of it should be so. In absolute governments, where the monarch is the source of all power, it is still held to be important that the exercise of that power shall be free from the influence of extraneous violence and internal corruption. In a republican government like ours, where political power is reposed in representatives of the entire body of the people, chosen at short intervals by popular elections, the temptations to control these elections by violence and by corruption is a constant source of danger. And this is what I'm saying about the DFL quota system. Such has been the history of all republics, and though ours has been comparatively free from both these evils in the past, no lover of this country can shut his eyes to the fear of future danger from both sources. But here's what today's Chief Judge of the Minnesota U.S. District Court says about the DFL's gender and race and sexual preference quotas in DFL endorsements for federal office. People like Al Franken, Amy Klobuchar, or Betty McCollum. In Minnesota, writes Judge Davis, a party's endorsement is simply an expression of support by a private political association. It has no impact on the legal processes by which Minnesota chooses its elected officials, unquote. Many of you who cast your votes for the DFL did not know that behind the scenes, shady judges and party officials were allowing this show democracy, a real production by the DFL, and excluding your kind from participation or voting in your precinct caucus on account of your race or gender, if you are a white man, or some other group who is either limited or excluded. Now you know. And it's even worse because the state constitution secures your right to vote or participate as long as you are of age and haven't got felony or treason on your record. Well, to the DFL, to be a white male after your quota has been met, or even disagree with the way the DFL is running the show democracy, is just as bad as a felony or treason, because you've lost your vote. Maybe it's treason to disagree with DFL rigging the elections, and they keep you away with their state statute, Minnesota Statute 202A.16 Subdivision 2, which says you have to agree with this principle expressed in their constitution and their little show democracy. I know it's a private association, a private club, private property, but it has its own constitution, like a banana republic. And their Constitution is at loggerheads with your Constitution, the Minnesota Constitution, because one says your right to vote is secured and all the courts and all parties must recognize that. And the other says, well, that means if you agree with all the fine print here and, well, according to the fine print, it's not white guys' day. You can't vote. If you don't agree with that, don't come to our party. You're not invited. How did we get from James Kent's glowing description of our democracy to the DFL's dull collection of etiquette? So what does Al Franken think the answer is to our floundering democracy? He wants to repeal the First Amendment and has introduced a bill in the Senate to use the Constitution to pull all power over the spending of money in campaigns or in-kind contributions into the hands of the Senate and the House, and not to be decided by free Americans regulated by the Supreme Court based on our current First Amendment. Crisis of character.